Putin's conversation, but to the press conference, where Trump said he didn't see any reason why Russia would meddle in our election, contradicting U.S. intelligence. Here are some of the greatest hits.
You have been watching perhaps one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president.
You should call this the Surrender Summit. And that's why I use the term that this is nothing short of treasonous, because it is a betrayal of the nation.
Trump, of course, clarified his remarks and expressed his support of the intel community. He even said this.
Look at the sanctions I've put on. Look at the diplomats I threw out. Look at all of the things that I've done. Nobody else did what I've done. Obama didn't do it. Obama was a patsy for Russia. He was a total patsy. Look at the statement he made where he thought the mics were turned off, okay? The stupid statement he made. Nobody does a big deal about that. Getting along with President Putin, getting along with Russia is a positive, not a negative.
Right.
Now, with that being said, if that doesn't work out, I'll be the worst enemy he's ever had.
That doesn't sound like a guy afraid of Russia. What the media and the left completely forget to mention in this conversation is that Helsinki didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a series of major moves by President Trump overseas. For example, who would forget President Trump's highly successful summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, who pledged to work towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? That meeting was just last month. And last week, President Trump at the NATO summit in Brussels demanded our allies pay more of their share of military spending. Check out this graph by Bloomberg showing increases in military budgets from NATO members from 2016 to 2017, which some are calling the Trump bump. That happened before the NATO summit. And Bloomberg is also out with a report that says Trump and Putin are in discussions over the Ukraine crisis. So it's not always a bad thing to talk to your adversaries. Here's what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said about Trump and Putin potentially meeting again this fall.
It is incredibly valuable to the people of the United States of America that President Putin and President Trump continue to engage in dialogue to resolve the difficult issues that our countries face between each other. I think this makes enormous sense, and I'm very hopeful that that meeting will take place this fall.
Joining me now for reaction is Eric Beach, co-chair of the pro-Donald Trump Great America PAC. And with me here in studio in Washington, D.C., Matt Schlapp, co-chair of the American Conservative Union, and former Obama State Department official David Tafuri. Thank you, gentlemen, all for being here. I do appreciate it. I want to start with David because I see the Democrats, they flip out on everything. I think they overplay in their hand every single time. But tell me, under President Obama and Secretaries Clinton and Kerry, what is the very best thing that President Obama did and accomplished with Russia?
Well, a different time, of course, because President Obama did try a reset with Russia. That was before Russia invaded Crimea. It's before Russia invaded Crimea. It's before it started a war in eastern Ukraine. It didn't go well, although at first they did make some accomplishments. They got a START treaty in place. They got Russia to allow the U.S. to bring in forces across Russia.
Took over Crimea.
Let me finish. To bring in equipment for our military in Afghanistan across Russian airspace, and Russia put in place sanctions on Iran. So some things did happen. Then Russia didn't like it that some Eastern European countries were trying to join the EU and join NATO, and that's when it fell apart. That's when Russia invaded Crimea.
I think fall apart is the operative word here, because if you look at everything that happened and all of these attacks on our financial systems, and this all happened during President Obama's watch. Eric, I want to bring in...
None of the attacks on the financial system are anything like the meddling in our election. The integrity of our democracy...
When did that happen? That happened. No. But that happened during Obama's watch.
Yes, it did.
He went out and told the world...
It did.
He told America and the world, you couldn't even do it even if you tried. And that was a lie. It was an absolute... Let me bring in Eric here. Eric, how do you read this situation? Is it better under Trump or better under Barack Obama?
Well, I'm not going to defend the Democrats, but I don't think they're the only target here. Trump's foreign policy doctrine is a direct threat to the neocons. And I think there are many Republicans and neocons that are undercutting the president. But the great irony there is he's the best friend to Israel. And, Russia is not a direct threat in terms, they have one military base outside of Russia. We have mutual interests with Russia, and the president is trying to secure the best deals. What are we going to do to denuclearize North Korea? How are we, according to some reports today, he's working with Israel or endorsing the Israel-Russia plan in Syria. So there's a lot of mutual interests. When we hold 90% of the nuclear power combined with Russia, we got to have a dialogue, and we need to understand how to make sure that we can make the world a democracy. And Russia's a lot like us in many different ways. And so, I don't think it's just the Democrats that we should target here. I think Trump, when he ran, he had a foreign policy doctrine that was a little bit libertarian, much like Rand Paul, who was also attacked during the campaign. So I think Trump should stick to his guns, open up this dialogue, and continue to do what he's doing.
Matt, there was some criticism from the right as well as
it's a little bit silly to make the argument that somehow it would be unwise for a brand new, fresh president of the United States to not deal with the leader of Russia. Okay? We've got to do that. The idea that Trump is somehow soft on Putin just because when they are in each other's company, he tries very hard to be, and in some cases too hard the other day, to be hospitable. Right. But the policy is what matters. And the policy coming out of the Trump administration, as you pointed out, is 2 or 3 times tougher than anything we saw in Obama. If you look at the export controls, if you look at the sanctions, if you look at the number of people being kicked out of the country, if you look at the bombing that the president has done, if you look at every single criteria, the president's policy is tough. What the Democrats have a problem with is some of his words. He realized himself that some of his words.
But what's the strategy behind that? If the actions are tough, why are the words so soft? Because there is, I think, a concern that the words are soft on Putin, but they're not soft on anybody else.
That's not true. The president has chosen 2 leaders, you notice they don't have nicknames, okay? The president of China and Vladimir Putin, because he realizes that the relationship is hinged, that it matters what you do with one and the impact on the other. And what the president is going to do, and where he's clearly pointing, is the fact that China is both, from a national security standpoint and an economic standpoint, our biggest adversary on the globe.
So all 3 of you are trying to distract from an embarrassing capitulation that happened on Monday. What happened on Monday in Helsinki is the president departed from the vision of every other president, Democrat and Republican, who stood up to authoritarianism and who supported freedom, democracy, and rule of law against Russia. We've had 13 presidents since
Castro in the
Hold on a second.
Castro in the mullahs?
Let me finish.
Okay, but that wasn't standing up.
We've had 13.
He's right, though. He's right, though, about Castro.
We've had 13 presidents since World War II. All of them stood up to Russia when it tried to export its brand of authoritarianism to Eastern Europe, except the 13th, President Trump. 13's an unlucky number.
Jimmy Carter didn't sell him grain. That was really tough. That was some really tough.
Of course, again, you're going back to the 70s because of what had happened on Monday.
Let me bring in Eric. Eric, what's your take on this?
Well, the problem with the Democrats is it has never been about election meddling. According to some, unclassified documents, they meddled in 81 times. The reality is it's about collusion between Trump and Russia, and they have yet to prove that. So now all of a sudden they worry about meddling. David mentioned the last 13 presidents. I haven't heard anything about election meddling in any of those presidents. And the last time that we heard from Obama, he said it could never happen. So their narrative is being lost here. But again, the president doesn't need to target the Democrats. They have no power. They have no message. I think what he needs to do is stick to his guns on his foreign policy doctrine, because the results are what matter. And he's getting results in his North Korea trip and also with Russia. And hopefully we can continue to have that dialogue.
Matt, what results in North Korea? North Korea, I applauded.
Well, we brought home the hostages.
I applauded that the president. I applauded that the president met with a North Korean leader, but there has been no results so far. There's no evidence. There's no evidence that North Korea has backed off its nuclear ambition at all. And satellite images show that they're continuing to use the nuclear sites.
But you're rooting for the president, I assume.
No, I am rooting for the president. I supported
it's the right thing to do.
I supported the meeting in Singapore.
Right, it's the right thing to do to try to.
Absolutely,
it was the right thing to get the prisoners back.
A success now before there's any material example of how North Korea has backed off.
Hold on. It was the right thing.
It's wrong, and you're misleading people.
Hold on. I'll agree with you that we've seen no progress on the nuclear weapons yet. But it was a promising first step to get the prisoners back without sending a pallet of cash over on a plane. And it was the right thing to engage another nuclear power on the globe. And the president was dealt a terrible policy that he inherited, and he's making the best of a bad situation.
Eric, there's talk about a second summit now, bringing Vladimir Putin to the White House for a meeting. Is that a good idea or bad idea for the president to do?
Look, I think he has to continue with the upper hand. I know that he misspoke during the meeting, but again, the intent is what we need here. We need to work with Russia. We have 90% of the nuclear power between the two countries. They're not going to get back into the game. They're not going to be a world order coming after us. You know, we need to work with them because we have mutual interests, and the president's doing the right thing. His doctrine is the right message, and he just has, you know, folks inside the United States that he has to fight on his message.
So, David, good thing or bad thing for the president to meet again with Putin?
Well, just look at what happened on Monday. A second meeting would be a disaster given the president's performance on Monday.
How can the Democrats, seriously, you represent, you're saying the same thing that I hear a lot from Democrats. Democrats are actually arguing against diplomacy, against dialogue, against discussion.
No, we're not arguing. We're not arguing against diplomacy. We're arguing in favor of results and setting an agenda that supports America and American interests. So he can invite Putin here, but he should say, all right, you're going to come here, you're going to bring the 12 Russian agents that interfered in our election, and you're going to agree to support stop supporting Assad. You're going to agree that you're going to agree to pull out of Crimea.
Yeah, I didn't
agree to pull out of eastern Ukraine.
Why didn't Barack Obama say that?
President Trump said those things and then said, and if you do those things, come to the U.S. I'd love to meet with you. That would be great. I'd support that.
Did you say that to Barack Obama? He was the president when that happened.
Well, Barack Obama's reaction.
All of those things.
Barack Obama's reaction to the invasion of Crimea should have been stronger. I agree with you. But President Trump is thinking about endorsing the annexation of Crimea.
How do you know what he's thinking?
You don't know what he's thinking.
That's been in the media.
Amazing. The media is always right.
His spokespeople have not denied that.
Let's go back to this. You said there should be goals in the next meeting with Putin, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
There were no goals for the meeting in Helsinki. That's part of the problem.
But the goals you just established for that meeting was the complete reversal of everything that happened on Obama. That's a pretty high bar. Well, you know what I'd like to see?
No.
I'd like to see things improve with Russia, and I'd like the president, I'd like Mr. Putin to understand that he can't get away with these things with a President Trump.
But a weak, ineffectual Trump meeting with Putin and having Putin get the best of him is not going to improve things.
So
and that's what happened on Monday, and that's what I fear. That's what I fear would happen if Putin comes back here to the U.S.
You just fear that Donald Trump's the president and he's actually making progress. That's the problem.
Nobody in the foreign policy field thinks he made progress on Monday. Nobody.
He made a lot of progress with what's going on with NATO, getting tens of billions of dollars. In fact, I got to segue now to the next topic because I have Mike Turner who's going to talk about this. Gentlemen, I really do appreciate it. This is a vibrant conversation on a beautiful Friday night. I really do appreciate you coming in. And Mr. Beach, I appreciate you being here as well. I need to now bring in someone who knows a thing or two about America's role in the world. It's Congressman Mike Turner, a Republican from Ohio, who's also the chairman of the U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I had the honor of serving with Mr. Turner in the Congress, and I thank you, sir, for being here. When I thought about what was going on with NATO, look, I was convinced when I was a member of Congress, you probably knew more than just about anybody, at least in the House of Representatives, as it relates to NATO. Earlier, I put up a graphic about the tens of billions of dollars that are now starting to flow to our NATO partners. What sort of effect do you think Trump has had, although unconventional, in pushing our NATO partners to pony up and pay their fair share?
Absolutely. He's had a huge impact. And this is an important impact because this goes right to not only just our national security, but the national security of the overall alliance. You know, in 2014 at the Wales summit, the NATO allies made a commitment to reach 2%. This is something that they agreed to. It's not being imposed upon them by the United States. But at the same time, they were not reaching this goal. President after president, Secretary of Defense after Secretary of Defense would point this out and would chastise our NATO allies, but no real movement was being made. The president has come in, is holding them accountable, requiring that they come forward with plans to reach the goal. And as you just described, you know, an untold amount of money is now flowing into their own militaries, which then are contributed overall to NATO's capability. He's having a huge and very positive impact on the capability and the funding for NATO militaries' goals and objectives.
You know what's fascinating to me about this? We're going to show you a quick bit of footage. This is Donald Trump on Oprah Winfrey's program 30 years ago. Listen to what Donald Trump said 30 years ago.
What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share.
Pretty interesting that he said that. I thought it was actually interesting watching that for about the fifth time. talking to our enemies, it's not so easy, and I think we kind of demonstrated that. But for him to say pushing our allies to phony up and pay their fair share, I mean, that's something that Donald Trump has done. How does that work in terms of conventional forces, but then also the space race? You've heard the president announce a new push there. Estonia, a NATO ally, is critical in their cyber front. What's the balance there, and how is that money? How would you like to see that money spent?
Well, I think, first off, I think the president in articulating even 30 years ago and today that the bill for defending NATO should not be sent to the United States, that the NATO allies should share their burden, is absolutely where the American people are. And I think that needs to be communicated clearly to the allies. Well, Russia itself has an economy somewhere between that of Italy or Spain, not Italy and Spain. Yet they have a military that's capable of threatening all of Europe. What we need to see from our European counterparts are investments in real capabilities. We have forward deployed our forces to help counter some of the aggressiveness of Russia along the border. But they need to look at real capabilities, ground capabilities, air capabilities, so that they can actually deter Russia. This is a real issue of not just, can you win in a conflict, or, how do we engage in deployments, but how do we avoid conflict? And that avoidance of conflict is investing in deterrence, and that's having a military capable of your adversary looking and saying, I don't want to mess with you, this cost would be too high.
But there are a lot of people that are concerned that now that there's $600+ billion, nearly $700 billion going into the military, where other countries, China, Russia, and others, can play at an equal footing with the United States, is in the cyber front. So how do we attack that? Where do we spend that money? And what do we do when we know that Russia is attacking the United States on the cyber front?
Right, absolutely. And you are absolutely correct that we do know this. Well, we're doing it on a couple of levels. One, obviously, is trying to work with both industry and with government infrastructure to try to fortify our electronic systems so that where they're not subject to hacking. Working also with our allies so that they're not a backdoor to all of this. But then also, we need to hone our skills, as the president has said, in doing to our adversaries what our adversaries do to us, and making certain that we have an ability to have a presence that also can counter and hold them at bay from hurting us.
Yeah, I think this is one of the big questions for our country and for our population. If somebody were to lob missiles at us, you could fire back. But when somebody attacks us electronically, right, how do you fire back? Congressman Turner, I thank you for joining us tonight, a real expert in this field, and I thank you for being here. Is the Helsinki summit affecting Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe? We'll have analysis coming up next. It seems the one thing Democrats are happy about with the Helsinki summit is that it keeps the heat off the Mueller probe. A CNN headline today blared, "Trump team worries. Could Helsinki disaster strengthen Mueller's hand?" Speaking of the Mueller probe, there are more allegations of unfair treatment. There are reports that Democratic lobbyist Tony Podesta worked on behalf of a Ukrainian interest without registering under the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Mueller indicted Trump's former campaign manager Paul Manafort over very similar accusations. So are Manafort and Podesta being treated the same by Mueller's team? Not according to Tucker Carlson's reporting last night.
We can report exclusively, based on two separate sources we spoke to today, that Tony Podesta has been offered immunity by Robert Mueller to testify against Paul Manafort. In other words, for a near identical crime, Bill and Hillary's friend could skate and emerge completely unscathed, while Paul Manafort may rot in jail.
That doesn't seem very fair. Here to discuss is former FBI spokesperson John Iannarelli, retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon, and Democratic strategist Scott Bolden, who's joining me here in the studio, I should say. Bobby, I want to ask you, you being involved and engaged in the FBI, when do you use immunity? And, why is it that we continue to see, if the reporting is true, and I have every reason to believe Tucker Carlson, in the Hillary Clinton probe, they gave out 5 sets of immunity and got nothing for it. And now here we're hearing reports that Tony Podesta is getting immunity. When do you use it? When's it appropriate?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Really, the first and foremost one, as you would think it might be, is if the person you're dealing with has committed a crime. if they haven't committed a crime or you don't think they've committed a crime, they have nothing to be immune from. So clearly Podesta is thought of by the Mueller team to have engaged in some kind of conduct that he needs immunity from. That's the first and foremost thing. The second thing is you feel that he has some information that he could give you on some of the people that are targets from in your investigation, which means only that he must have dealt with them either in a criminal conspiracy or in criminal matters that relate to Mueller's investigation. So there's two things. They must think that Podesta did something illegal and that illegal activity or some activity that he engaged in was connected to the probe going on, because that's how criminal conspiracies work. Guys get together to commit crimes. So Podesta, really, this immunity deal to me puts Podesta right in the middle of this thing.
Scott, how do you react to this when we see this report and suddenly they're handing out immunity to yet another Democrat?
Well, this isn't a partisan issue. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a white-collar criminal defense lawyer, so my colleague on your program is absolutely right. But every case is different. Here's the deal. Manafort certainly is charged with more crimes, substantially more than Podesta. And if Podesta was part of a deal or some type of conspiracy, then he has information that they need to prosecute Manafort or others. Two, they believe he's committed a crime. He was a subject or a target. And three, Manafort is fighting these charges. Manafort isn't rolling over and trying to cooperate and make America better and tell what's going on with Russia and Trump and others. He's fighting these charges. That's why he's in jail, and that's why Podesta is getting immunity.
John, your background with the FBI, you saw what happened in the Hillary Clinton probe, but then, 5 sets of immunity, and the FBI admitted we got nothing for that in exchange. Have you ever seen that? If the FBI ever have any other case where they handed out 5 sets of immunity, got nothing for it, and now here they are handing out immunity again?
Well, they're getting his testimony in the prosecution of Manafort. That's something that's super valuable for any prosecutor.
Yeah, but John, you had a long career at the FBI. How did you see this?
To hand out so many immunities is unusual, and to get nothing for it. I think the lesson we're seeing here is if you're going to commit a crime, it pays to have a relative who's in high political office so that you can be the one offered immunity. But let's not forget, the reality is that maybe he knows something that the other people being charged don't know. Maybe he can offer more information. They're obviously going to look for getting the biggest bang for their buck.
Yeah, and I have a hard time believing that going after Mr. Manafort is the biggest fish. I mean, he was with the Trump campaign for 3 or 4 months, something like that. But we'll see. I mean, Mueller's been given a lot of latitude, but they're trying to equate what happened in Russia with Mr. Putin and this, but there's been no evidence of any collusion. I want to go and talk actually about some of the something else, something that was in a little bit more of the fallout from the Helsinki summit. Former intelligence chiefs are now politicizing their role in going after Trump. And here's what a former acting CIA director said.
At what point will there be critical mass of objection to some of the lunacy that's going on here under this president? To state it baldly, the United States was attacked and the president sided with the enemy.
And ousted FBI Director James Comey had to throw in his 2 cents, tweeting, quote, "All who believe in this country's values must vote for Democrats this fall. Policy differences don't matter right now. History has its eyes on us." Gentlemen, is this an appropriate thing for the former intel chiefs to jump in here and do this? And I actually want to start with Scott, because I think these things actually play into Donald Trump's hands.
Well, I don't think they play in the hand, but what is your issue with what they've said, your GOP colleagues have said, what Democrats have said, and what we watched? We watched a president that did not denounce Russia. 13 of his government agents were just indicted by Mueller. We have 17
Under the
agencies.
Trump administration, yes.
Okay, and 17 agencies have said that they attacked our election system, and our president, GOP president, denies it. And then he gets on a consequential world stage and does nothing about it.
It's too strong to say he denies it. He said he misspoke. You know that Donald Trump does not like to go out and correct
the world stage. He misspoke.
And he went back out there, and he doesn't like to do that.
No, he doesn't. But I got to tell you, saying misspoke when you're under that summit should never have taken place with these indictments and with those 17
agencies. What I love about the
It
Democrats.
never should have taken place.
Don't talk to anybody. John, I got to bring in John here.
Okay.
John, you've got a lot of experience as an FBI agent. Is it the right, proper place for these intel chiefs to be able to go out right after and then go start to say and advocate for the Democrats? How does that play?
Hey, I'll tell you, I am just happy that Comey's using his personal phone and not a government phone if he's tweeting. But they shouldn't be doing this. The reality is that they understand from those positions a lot of moving parts are going on behind the scenes. Nobody actually knows once you're out of position what the president is doing or his administration. So they actually could be undermining other factors that are taking place. And I will tell you, whether you like Putin, don't like Putin, like Trump, don't like Trump, it never hurts to speak to the other side, because every time you do, you get a little more intelligence.
Let me go to Bobby here. Bobby, your experience, an FBI director, former intel chiefs that are out there making these comments, how does that strike you?
It's irresponsible, and it actually damages the republic. I would be in favor of certain senior level policy officials being barred from doing this kind of political rhetoric. I mean, we have the Hatch Act, which is enforceable against government employees. But once you leave the government, there should be some enforceable mechanism that these guys cannot go out, these senior policy guys who had access to all this information, and then go on these tweet storms. And pretty much some of them lost their mind in their anger and rhetoric against the current president. And I think that you can't separate that rhetoric from some of the things that they knew and learned with their security clearances in their prior jobs. So I think there has to be some kind of cooling off period where these guys have to keep their mouths shut, go home, and sit on their hands and watch the government function. Because right now, they're interfering with the function of our government as former senior policy executives.
So they lose their First Amendment, right? That's really what he's saying. Here's the bottom line.
No, the Hatch Act is perfectly enforceable under the First Amendment.
Former
I was
employees, that's
from
not
political
true.
speech for 27. The Hatch Act was enforceable against me for 27 years. The First Amendment doesn't get enforceable when you're employed or not employed. The First Amendment of the Constitution does not spell out that it can only be enforceable when you're employed or not employed. There are certain conditions to government employment that can be enforced.
Let me give Scott a second
here. Bottom line, though. Yes. Donald Trump drives every narrative in this presidency, right? You want to block people from observing and speaking on what they saw that both sides were highly critical of, right? How about
No, I didn't. No, wait a sec. I didn't suggest that they block it. What I'm saying is it plays into Donald Trump's hands, because what he says is, I didn't get a fair shake. These people were conspiring against me. And then you have James Comey months after saying he's got a higher loyalty, saying, don't worry about the policy. Policies don't matter in this country.
It doesn't anymore.
Just vote for Democrats, which is in his self-interest because he doesn't want a probe of himself.
Well, wait a minute now. The GOP is in control, and the GOP left him. He didn't leave the GOP. He's a lifelong Republican. How can you say that?
He registered as an independent. But what I'm saying is, when he goes out and says, vote for Democrats no matter what is his best interest? If the Democrats take over the House, then these probes that Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe and everybody do, that goes away. And I hope America sees through what he's trying to do.
How come it hasn't gone away with GOP control then? You all control everything. So why hasn't it gone away then? Why won't DOJ turn over documents to the GOP House and Senate? That's a whole nother
You and I will agree on that. You and I will agree on that. John, I want to give you the last word here. We've got just like 10 seconds. What does the average FBI agent out there, the rank and file, what do they think when they see a person like James Comey go out and say, vote for Democrats?
Hey, can we just get back to being agents and doing our jobs without all the political discussion? That's what the rank and file agents are thinking. We don't want our directors to be political. We want to be able to have the public's trust and do the job that they are doing right now.
Yeah, and you're right. My grandfather was a career FBI agent. I can't thank those men and women enough for what they do and how they do it. Gentlemen, I want to say thank you. What are the Democrats? So what are the Democrats really after when it comes to their Russian obsession? Rush Limbaugh put out an interesting theory yesterday.
When they lose, it can't be because they have been rejected by voters. No, there has to be some nefarious reason. There has to be tampering. There has to be meddling. there has to be collusion. And in the process, they have done a great job of making so many millions of Americans question the integrity of elections now. I believe this all has a very long-term purpose, and that is to eventually get rid of elections. Don't laugh and be very careful in criticizing me, because I'm here to tell you that if they could, they would.
That might sound a little out there unless you tuned in to Morning Joe this week.
Can we rewrite the Constitution and have another president take over right now?
I mean, seriously, get rid of the Constitution and put in a new president. That's the attitude that the left's taken on Morning Joe. Joining me now to debate what's really going on here is Leo Terrell, a civil rights attorney, and Horace Cooper, a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us here. I really do appreciate it. Leo, what's the end game?
Yes.
What's the obsession with Russia? Why is it, and what's the end game? What are you playing for?
Well, first of all, can I just make a comment about Russia? Russia is way out there. Al Gore, with grace and dignity, accepted the 2000 election. Regarding Russia, Donald Trump doesn't. He should start inviting Dan Coates to the White House for more dinner, because he's going to throw him under the bus. And your friend Matt, who earlier this week talked about how President Trump threw the intelligence under the bus, Matt got the memo and realized his wife works at the White House. My point is very simple. The Russian meddling is real. Both the Democrats and the Republicans realize that. And finally, your colleague, Trey Gowdy, you know him, Jason, he said the Mueller probe is necessary.
Now, Leo, let's just make sure we get our facts straight, because it was Barack Obama weeks before the election said that nobody was doing it, and even if they tried, they couldn't do it. Was that true or not true?
Well, see, that's a good move, Jason. I said I mentioned your colleague, Trey Gowdy. You go to the Obama card. Trey Gowdy currently keeps saying that the Mueller probe is legit. You want to talk about Obama?
We're not arguing.
I want to talk about Trey Gowdy.
About that. We're not arguing about that. I'm asking you, was Barack Obama accurate or inaccurate? Did he lie or was he telling the truth?
I can't get into the headset of Barack Obama as far as his motivation.
All right, you did answer it.
But I can tell you what's going on right now.
On that one. I understand that. Let's go to Horace.
Okay, great.
Here. How do you read this?
Look, the left hasn't accepted these elections. They're like, and pardon the expression here, but this is like Jason the 15th, the horror movie, in terms of Hillary Clinton coming up with an excuse after excuse after excuse for why they didn't win, and they haven't accepted this outcome yet. And that is their real problem. They're not concerned about America's national security the way they'd have you believe it.
Now, they suddenly have become hawks, though. When I look at the Democrats,
these are chicken hawks. These are chicken hawks. Look at what they did over my lifetime. I started working in Washington, D.C., and I watched an organization called the American Security Council. They used to rate the Democrats, like Nancy Pelosi, like Dick Durbin, like Chuck Schumer, all the way to the present. What we saw was every chance it came to protect America from Moscow, they were on the other side. They were cutting side deals. Kennedy talking over with the Russian government and their leaders, all the way to the present, after George W. Bush reaches an agreement with Eastern European countries about an anti-ballistic missile program. So, what do? They
Jason, Horace is just. Those are talking points. We're talking about that. You cannot.
It's reality.
Kind of history, I think.
Putin.
But yeah,
you cannot trust Putin. I mean, Jason, you know
I don't
this.
trust Putin.
Even your own Republican
Unless you're
colleagues
waiting for an
know
election,
that the Russian meddling is real. And more importantly, and let's be honest. Horace, look at the Al Gore footage. He accepted with dignity and class the 2000 election.
You got to go back to 2000.
Way off.
Wait a second. Still hasn't.
Throwing away elections. Come on.
You make a big point about Al Gore accepting the outcome of the election. I haven't seen any of that from Hillary Clinton. I saw it with grace and dignity from Mitt Romney. I saw it from Al Gore. But what about Hillary Clinton? And why can't the Democrats accept that Donald Trump is the president?
The Democrats can accept Donald Trump as the president. He won the Electoral College. Let me say that right now. But, Jason, again, we have a problem. We have Russian meddling in our fundamental process. Elections, voting, and your Republican colleagues say the same things. And again, let's say this. Please, President Trump, may I make one plea? Please, President Trump, don't fire Dan Coates for being honest. Please, he's a good director of national intelligence. He's going to get rid. Please don't do that.
Of you. Horace, I want to ask you, Rush Limbaugh made a pretty strong allegation that the end game here is actually that the Democrats want to get rid of elections. You had Mike Barnicle, who's a pretty, respected person, at least he was before last week, who's out there saying, let's get rid of the Constitution or amend the Constitution so that we can instill a new president.
When Moscow created out of whole cloth the international peace movement that took over Europe with their funding, where was the left? When Moscow said that it was a farce that the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, would put up a strategic defense initiative, where were the progressives? They were with Moscow. You come all the way to today, 2017, when we had the president's budget on defense. Where were the progressives? They did not support
Jason,
it.
does he really believe this? Does he believe what he's actually saying?
He does.
Does he actually believe
Roosevelt said, talk softly and carry a big stick.
Okay.
Okay,
Leo, because I could have sworn that it was President Kennedy. Hey, Horace, how about Missiles of October, 13 days in October? I suggest you read it and review it, because the guy in the White House is a guy named JFK. He was a Democrat, but you may not want to know that.
And that's
what is
the
this?
last time.
And he was probably the last hawk you guys have ever had.
Hey, look, go to one more recently when the Russians, brushed in and took over Crimea. I didn't hear the Democrats criticizing Barack Obama. I didn't hear them raising this. And the president misspoke at a press conference, something he recanted and clarified, and y'all are going nuts. That's what's just
no, I'm
60 years. 60 years the left has been on the wrong side, siding with Moscow against the interests of America.
Let Leo have the last word. We got just 10 seconds.
Horace and Jason, talk is cheap. Let's see some results. If President Trump is going to have Putin come to the White House, let's see some results in all these so-called disasters created by Obama. Let's see some disaster, because talk is real cheap right now.
Well, there has been action. And you know what? One of the things that Vladimir Putin is looking down the pipe at is the fact that there are tens of billions of more dollars going into the defense of our NATO allies. And that didn't happen under any other president than President Trump. Gentlemen, I thank you for joining us on this beautiful Friday night. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Outrageous and hypocritical? We'll show you the wildest things Democrats said about Trump-Putin summit when we come right back. Stay there. Welcome back. I'm Jason Chaffetz in for Laura Ingraham on this Ingraham Angle special, the Trump-Putin summit fallout. When it comes to the Helsinki summit, it's almost as if the liberals are in a competition to see who can sound the most outraged.
Some people are calling it the appeasement summit.
I would say that his performance today will live in infamy as much as the Pearl Harbor attack or Kristallnacht.
The entire history of our country, Americans have never seen a president of the United States support an adversary the way President Trump has supported President Putin.
I sadly beseech President Trump to apologize to the American people for his disgraceful, dangerous, and damaging behavior with Putin in Helsinki.
Wow. Joining me now for a reaction is Victor Davis Hanson, one of the world's leading historians and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. I believe you're in Hawaii, so aloha, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No, I do appreciate it. Look, you have Democrats on that clip trying to compare something that he said he misspoke about and comparing that to Pearl Harbor, which you're just a few miles from. I mean, how over the top? What's your reaction when you hear that?
I'm a little worried because Donald Trump has expelled Russians from the United States. He's beefed up the sanctions. He's armed the Ukrainians. He's warned Putin in very blunt terms about his behavior in Syria. We've killed Russian mercenaries that attacked a U.S. base. He's upped U.S. oil production that Putin didn't like. He's really jawboning NATO to get tough. He's criticized German dependence, increasing dependence on Russian oil, and yet this is a man that has 7,000 nukes. So when he goes out in a press conference and he knows the questions are going to be, how willing are you to insult the man next to you that has 7,000 nukes? It's a lose-lose situation, because if he doesn't insult them, then he's colluding, and if he does insult them, he's blown up the summit. So I don't think we want to get into this spiral escalatory situation where we keep trying to push Putin in a corner, especially after we've seen 8 years of the reset process where we didn't do much about Ukraine or Crimea. We dismantled missile defense in Eastern Europe. We had this sort of tell Vladimir to behave and then I'll get reelected and I'll be flexible. We made fun of Mitt Romney. We cut down oil production. We didn't do much about defense. And so it's surreal that it's almost as either we have to overreact because we didn't do much about Putin, and now we have to push Trump into a corner where we're almost at war with a power that, in terms of economic size, is not comparable to China. China's espionage apparatus makes Putin's look pathetic. So it's getting very dangerous. All this is getting dangerous, Jason, because, I mean, rhetorically, we've exhausted the vocabulary of killing Trump. I mean, we decapitate him, we stab him, we ritually shoot him, we burn him up, we blow him up. We've exhausted suing under the Electoral College. We want to abandon it. We've looked at the emoluments clause. We looked at the 25th Amendment. We boycotted the inauguration. We've introduced articles of impeachment. And now we're in this rhetorical that he's Stalin, that he's Hitler, that he's a traitor. What's the next level? Where does this lead? I mean, there's 330 million people out there, and if some people think, well, he's Hitler, I've been told that, then what are you going to do about it? And the next level is violence.
He also, I mean, the Democrats also sound, I mean, first of all, they sound very unhinged, but they also sound like they're being hypocritical. President Trump tweeted out a clip of what Hillary Clinton said about Russia when she was Secretary of State back in 2010.
Yes.
And she told a Russian TV network, let me read this for you. We want very much to have a strong Russia. Okay. We want to have a strong Russia because a strong, competent, prosperous, stable Russia is, we think, in the interests of the world. Now, I didn't hear a single one of those Democrats who are yelling and screaming from a misstatement by the president at a press conference have the same sort of reaction to what Hillary Clinton said, in that she wanted a strong Russia. How did that strike you?
Yes. And, well, and beyond that, Barack Obama, as you've played, has already assured the United States that they're incapable of affecting an election. This is the President of the United States. So what's the font of all this? And the font of it is unhappiness over an unexpected loss, perhaps regret that they weren't tougher on Russia on the other side, the other 8 years, but more importantly, to delegitimize a president in lieu of an agenda that might win 51% of the support.
But have you ever seen the Democrats? So, I mean, Democrats have always tried to advocate for, you know, let's have a dialogue. And then when the person in the White House, Donald Trump, is actually negotiating and actually having a dialogue and being a diplomat, they go unhinged. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think it has anything to do with Russia. I think it has everything to do with the election. If it wasn't Russia, it would be another melodrama. Remember that Reset was formed and birthed in reaction that George W. Bush was too harsh, Obama and Hillary Clinton said, in his reactions to the invasion